The Noblesse. In a rev, a young traveler came to participate in the Cygnus Knight's entrance exam. While exploring the island, they came across a large mansion with training grounds that they believed would be helpful for practicing before the exam began. Just then, a Pio elder arrived and greeted them. He explained that the mansion had once belonged to the Noblesse and asked whether they knew the term. Author's note: I think that this might be the same Pio elder from Mihail's storyline. To his surprise, the traveler told him that their ancestors had passed down the words, "Never forget the duty of the noblesse." The elder told them that in the aftermath of the ancient war between the ancient gods and the adversaries, a time of chaos had begun as people began warring over the new territories that they had established. Shinsu, the divine bird of Arev, had felt pity for the weak who were being slain in the conflict and resolved to protect them. Eventually, a group of warriors who had been under Shinsu's protection had decided to follow in her footsteps that had become known as the they had become known as the Noblesse. The Nobleses, is it Nobleses? I think, had fought bravely to ensure that peace returned to Maple World, but many had been killed in battles, and by the time that peace had finally returned, knowledge of the Nobleses had become all but forgotten. However, the elder believed that the traveler was a noblesse themselves, explaining that the term was not one of bloodline or nobility, but a title bestowed upon anyone who followed the ideals of mercy and peace. The traveler, having understood that they were a noblesse, resolved to become a Cygnus Knight and make their ancestors proud. Author's note: this is a new change in the Cygnus Knight's revamped storyline, as the origins of the Noblesse had never been previously explained. Before Ignition, I had just assumed that Noblesse was a fancy title that all the applicants who came from around the Maple World got as an incentive to join. The Noblesse mansion in Arev is also new, as I don't think there were ever any buildings seen on the island before, which is strange to consider, since that implies that Cygnus and the others just sleep outside. A future quest also reveals that the Noblesse had gone extinct during the mysterious war from 300 years ago, which made me really excited because I never thought that they'd ever reference it again. The last mention of the war was in 2018 during the MapleStory localization for Monad, but since Monad was developed in GMS, which doesn't have that reference, the last canon mention was back in 2011 during Phantom's storyline. The lore about the Noblesse was actually a little bit different from the story when the storyline was released in the test servers. While the Noblesse had fought alongside Shinsu for many years, they were a clan tied by bloodline rather than ideology. As such, the player was already part of the Noblesse clan, many of them whom had joined the Cygnus Knights out of a sense of duty to serve the Empress. The lore about Shinsu, the war after the fall of the ancient gods, and the extinction of the Noblesse was a new addition upon the release of Ignition. The Noblesse was first led to the Knight's orientation, where a ceremony was held to welcome those who wished to join the ranks of the Cygnus Knights. At the ceremony, Mihail greeted the prospective candidates and informed them that though he wished that all the candidates could join their ranks, not everyone would make the cut, as the Cygnus Knights were the only force that currently stood to protect the Maple World from the return of the Black Mage. He then noticed the Noblesse and noted that they had a determined look on their face. The Noblesse replied that they were committed to being the spear and shield of the Empress, an answer which pleased Mihail. Author's note: in the test server, Mihail told the Noblesse that upon becoming a Cygnus Knight, they would no longer be a noble or be part of a clan, to which the Noblesse told him that they had come to become a knight, not a noble person, which was the answer that had originally pleased Mihail. I'm guessing that the reason why this was changed, why they changed this lore, was because if you think about it, if all the Noblesse become Cygnus Knights by following their sense of duty, they would all have to sever their ties to their clan and their fancy mansion, which means that pretty soon the Noblesse clan would go extinct. Most likely, the writers changed the Noblesse lore after realizing the accidental implication of what it means for the Noblesse to forfeit their titles. As the welcoming ceremony After the welcoming ceremony, the Noblesse underwent several examinations that tested their physical strength and knowledge. During the exam, the Noblesse wandered over to a pavilion where they encountered Empress Cygnus. Unaware of her true identity, the Noblesse mistook her for another examiner, and the two began to make small talk about the purpose of the Cygnus Knights and the importance of unity. Just then, Neinhard arrived and urgently told Cygnus that Baroque, the master of disguise, had infiltrated a rev and stolen an important treasure. The Noblesse offered to help, and so Neinhard sent them to search the island, though he warned them not to engage Baroque. The Noblesse soon encountered Mihail during their search and quickly deduced from his behavior that he was Baroque in disguise. After defeating him, they recovered the missing treasure and brought it to Neinhard. Neinhard congratulated the Noblesse for passing the mock training, explaining that it had been the final part of the examination. He added that the exercise had been based on an actual situation in which Baroque truly had invaded a rev and attempted to steal Shinsu's teardrop. Author's note: this is another name for the seal stone of a rev. The name Shinsu's teardrop has been around since a Ron storyline, but we finally got a backstory to its nickname during Mihail's level 200 quest. It reveals that during Orchid and Lotus's attack on a rev, both Arya and her Knight of Light had been killed in battle. Without an Empress to channel her power, Shinsu grew weak and believed that she was unable to protect the seal stone anymore. She then bestowed it upon the Knight of Light's successor, who placed it within his soul shield and began the tradition of the Knight of Light serving as the guardian of the gemstone. Shinsu then renamed the seal stone as Shinsu's teardrop in memory of Empress Arya's death. The Noblesse expressed their surprise that they had been able to defeat the mock Baroque, to which Neinhard clarified that they would surely have been killed if they had been facing the real one. He emphasized that their decision to face Baroque alone, despite being told not to engage in combat directly, impacted their fellow knights and the Empress, which was why it was important that they remember that they didn't have to do everything by themselves. He then sent them to meet with Cygnus, who would determine whether or not they had passed. Cygnus formally introduced herself after their brief meeting in the pavilion, and the Noblesse apologized for their behavior during the mock exam. However, Cygnus told them that conviction in one's path was also an important quality, and officially made them a Cygnus Knight. Soon after, Neinhard assigned them their first mission, which was to go to Victoria Islands and investigate the actions of Francis the puppeteer. In Hennesis, they met with their contact, Raka, who told them that they needed to obtain proof of the puppeteer's presence in town. The traveler first discovered several puppets in the cynical orange mushrooms and brought them to Raka, who noted that the dolls were causing the monsters to get more aggressive, though he couldn't say what purpose it served. He then remembered that Paya had been mentioning strange behavior in the horny mushrooms, which had gotten more aggressive. The knights went to meet Paya, who told them that no one would believe her testimony, that the angry horny mushrooms were near the pet park. The knight went to investigate and discovered several large puppet dolls hanging from large pieces of rope. They also discovered a horde of angry horny mushrooms in the area. After defeating them, they reported back to Raka, who realized that Francis had likely intended for the monsters to invade Hennesis. He decided to request for backup from a rev and sent the knight to work with Ten Boogies in Parion. In Parion, Ten Boogies showed them her puppeteer detector and explained that Oz had helped her create it. He told them that the detector was capable of picking up a trace of the magic that Francis used to control monsters. She told them that it had recently started picking up a large amount of activity near Parion and asked the knight to investigate. The knight investigated the source of the signal and defeated the berserk ghost stumps in the area. After they returned back, Ten Boogies checked the detector again and was shocked to find that there was a huge signal nearby, despite there not being a high enough number of monsters. She suspected that it might be Francis himself, and emphasized that they needed to check as soon as possible before he left. Though she also realized that it may be a trap, she also knew that there wasn't enough time to request backup from a rev, and so the knight agreed to go in alone. The knight discovered a cave, inside which they discovered Francis creating puppets and complaining aloud that there was no way that he could invade every town in Victoria Islands and gather enough energy for the Blackwings. Noting that it had taken quite some time to conquer Edelstein to begin with, the knight crept closer to hear better, but Francis heard them and ordered the knight to reveal themselves. Having been discovered, the knight defeated Francis, who managed to retreat. The knight noted that Francis had likely not been at full strength, as he had been busy making more puppets. They returned back to Ten Boogies and told her about Francis's plan to invade Victoria Islands with the monster army, as well as his goal to collect even more energy. Ten Boogies was curious about why he had been sent to gather energy, but the knight apologized and explained that they had been discovered before learning the answer. Nevertheless, she thanked them for their help as an apprentice knight and asked them to deliver her report to Neinhart in a rev. Neinhart was pleased that they had been able to defeat Francis with ease, informing them that Francis was the lowest ranking Blackwings officer and that others would be much more difficult to defeat, as each of them had bizarre and powerful abilities. The knight asked why the Blackwings were trying to resurrect the Black Mage, to which Neinhart told him that the Blackwings believed that the Black Mage would allow them to rule the world, though Neinhart dismissed them as fools who were wasting their talents. Nevertheless, he warned the knight not to underestimate the Blackwings' power, as it would have been impossible for them to have taken Edelstein otherwise. He then told the knight that their next mission would be in Edelstein, which he described as a town in the northern parts of Maple World. He explained that it had once been prosperous in the mining industry because of the city's power plant, which had been taken over by the Blackwings. As the Cygnus Knights were unsure about the Blackwings' motives, he told the knight that he was sending them to investigate. The knight was eager to have been assigned the mission, as they hoped that their actions would make a difference to the people of Edelstein. However, Neinhart told them that he needed to explain something important before they were dispatched. He told the knight that there was a resistance against the Blackwings, but that they were not allied with the Cygnus Knights. When the knight asked why this was, Neinhart told them that they would learn the answer themselves on the mission. He also emphasized that they should expect no support from both the resistance and the people of Edelstein. With that, he sent them to rendezvous with 10 Boogies in the outskirts of Edelstein. As they were able to board the airship, their chief knight arrived and asked whether it was true that they had defeated the puppeteer. The knight dismissed their actions as merely luck, and their chief knight was pleased by their humbleness. They warned the knight to remain vigilant, as darkness grew ever stronger, even as they did. They then wished the knight good luck on their mission, explaining that they had a mission of their own to complete. Author's note: the Cygnus Knight revamp made an effort to actually give a personality to the knight as being enthusiastic and humble to a fault. Prior to the Ignition revamp, the knight was perhaps the most boring character out of all the 3 self-insert classes, and had all the personality of a dead squirrel. Here, the knight had some semblance of a character arc, while learning to lean on other people and helping wherever they can, while the old knight went through the story as though they were being paid even less than the minimum wage writers who had drafted them into existence. In Edelstein, the knight met with 10 Boogies, who was relieved to see a fellow knight. She told them that some of the local children had covered her in bugs while she had been asleep, and had stolen her belongings. She asked the knight to get them back, warning them not to reveal that they were a Cygnus Knight while doing so. While obtaining the items, the knight was shocked to hear just how much animosity the townspeople held for the Cygnus Knights. The children who had stolen 10 Boogie's belongings led the knight to a remote part of town and began to ask them why they were helping a Cygnus Knights like 10 Boogies to get her item back. The knight told him that it was only right to help those in trouble. The children believed the knight's explanation and agreed to give back the stolen items. When the knight asked why they had hated the Cygnus Knights, however, the children told them that everyone knew how the Cygnus Knights had betrayed the people of Edelstein. They then showed a flyer which contained misinformation, such as how Cygnus and her knights were an honorless band of hypocrites who pretended to serve a cause while accumulating wealth and power for themselves. On the flyer, the knight noticed a black symbol and decided to ask 10 boogies about it. Author's note: the Black Wings flyer had been added in the revamp. I like this change because it adds more weight to the Black Wings being an authoritarian government that manipulates the young people of their society. I've always said that the Black Wings should have been portrayed as more competent like Hiver and Eleanor, rather than being jokes like Baroque or Francis. Luckily, it seems like they're going in a much more serious direction in the grandest story, with the way that they don't shy away from showing the horrors of fascism under the rule of the High Flora. Ten Boogies was relieved to get her belongings back and warned the knight not to underestimate the hatred for the Cygnus Knights in Edelstein. She explained the story behind why the resistance hated the Cygnus Knights, and why even the citizens of Edelstein viewed them as traitors. The knight then showed her the flyer denouncing Cygnus and asked about the symbol. Ten Boogies explained that it was a symbol of the Black Wings and suspected that they must have released such propaganda in order to further deepen Edelstein's hatred of the Cygnus Knights. The point that the resistance had stopped responding to all of the Cygnus Knights' communications. Nevertheless, she told them that their role as informants was to work with the citizens of Edelstein in spite of their hostilities, in order to learn the true goals of the Black Wings. She then explained that the knight's chief knight had reached out to her and asked her to supervise the knights' training while on their mission, and so she had them defeat the water thief monsters nearby. After the knight finished training, 10 Boogies asked them to speak with the townspeople in order to gather information, telling them to be careful not to let the citizens know that they were a Cygnus Knight. In town, the knight spoke with Checky, Brighton, Elix, and Bell, all of whom immediately recognized them as a Cygnus Knight and rebuffed them. They then spoke with Claudine, who told them that one of the children who had stolen 10 Boogies' belongings was her sister, Ulrika, who had told her that the knight had claimed not to be a Cygnus Knight. When Claudine asked whether that was true, the knight decided to be honest and revealed themselves as a Cygnus Knight, claiming that they just wanted to help the people of the town. Annoyed, Claudine took them to a back alley in order to speak more freely. Claudine told them that the knights didn't understand Edelstein's circumstances, and the lies and secrets only led to unnecessary complications, while staying vigilant around the Black Wings. She then asked why the Cygnus Knights had come to Edelstein, to which they told her that they had come to gather information on the strange activities in Victoria Island. Claudine told them that they were free to do so, but warned them to give up on befriending the people of Edelstein. The knight asked to get in contact with the resistance, but Claudine merely scoffed and asked how they planned on allying with the resistance when they couldn't even get the townspeople on their side. She added that for the sake of security, none of the citizens even knew about the identities of the resistance members. She also added that there was nothing to say to those who broke their word without even giving a proper justification as to why. The knight realized there must have been some misunderstanding, as the resistance had been ignoring all of Arev's attempts at communication. However, Claudine retorted that it was the Cygnus Knights who had cut off communication. Author's note: I've complained a lot about the Resistance Cygnus Knight feud in the past, but this revamp changed my mind on it a little. It's later revealed that the Blackwings cut off all communication between the two, which retroactively makes the conflict a little more understandable, since the Resistance now knows nothing about Eleanor's attack, rather than them knowing and not caring. She then told the knight that they were wasting their time and warned them to go back to Arev. As the knight walked away, Claudine called the Resistance headquarters and told them she had acquired their target, and told them to wait and observe. Realizing that there had been some sort of miscommunication, the knight decided to continue their investigation. They soon ran into Ulrika, who told them that she knew what they were after and claimed to be a member of the Resistance, adding that her youth lent credibility to her story, as it would be easier to avoid the suspicion of the Black Wings in order to help the Resistance on a secret mission. Author's note: Ulrika actually has no idea that Claudine is in the Resistance. because Claudine wants her to stay uninvolved as possible for her safety. She offered to take them to the resistance base in exchange for black plastic bags from the dust boxes and streetlight bulbs from the streetlight monsters, which she claimed to be for stocking their supplies. However, after the knight collected them, Ulrika told them that the materials were actually for her homework. She then gave the knight directions and went on ahead. As the knight followed Ulrika's directions, she and her friends prepared to ambush the knight by setting bugs on them, just as they had done with 10 boogies. Upon hearing footsteps, they jumped out and launched their surprise attack, but realized that Blackwing henchmen had appeared instead. The henchmen realized that the children were pretending to be resistance members and decided to kidnap them for Glimmer to use as test subjects. Just then, the knight arrived and found the henchmen. Advancing on the children, the knight quickly defeated the henchmen just as Checky rushed to the scene. Checky was grateful to the knight, but told them that it still wouldn't change their image in the eyes of the townspeople. However, he was surprised when the knight told him that they had only been doing the right thing and that they would do it so again. He then gave the traveler a note and told them to read it somewhere in private. The knight opened the note and read instructions for them to wait for a call at an abandoned phone booth in Nidlestein Park. As soon as the knight finished reading, the words on the notes vanished. Soon after they entered the booth, the phone began to ring, and they picked it up to hear a modulated voice of Claudine, making the knight unable to decipher who was on the other end. Claudine asked them what they wanted, to which the knight explained that the Blackwings were active on Victoria Island, and they wanted to know why. When Claudine asked if they expected the Resistance to share that information with the Cygnus Knights, the knight pointed out that they had a common enemy. Claudine replied that she had no intention of allying with them, but as they had saved the children, she would share the information in order to make them even. She explained that the Blackwings were directing all of Edelstein's energy towards a single spot, which had been causing rolling blackouts in the city. The blackouts were affecting the city's power plants, fish factory, lighting system, and even their water supply. She believed that the Blackwings were gathering large quantities of energy in order to fuel top-secret experiments. She explained that the Resistance didn't know what the experiment was, but they did know that the Blackwings were stealing seal stones from the Maple World, and she believed that the two were likely related. The knight confirmed the Resistance's suspicion about the experiment and by telling her what Francis had said in Parion. They also told her that the Blackwings were using children as test subjects, which they had learned while saving Ulrika and the others from the Blackwing henchmen. Claudine noted that they seemed to know a lot about it, but told them that she had shared enough and ordered them to leave Edelstein as soon as possible. The knight returned to Ten Boogies and told her everything that they had learned from the Resistance. Ten Boogies noted that even though they now knew that Francis had been gathering energy for the experiment, they still needed to know what kind of experiment was being conducted. She asked the knight to collect memory chips from the Patrolbot S monsters in order to analyze their data, as well as Rube batteries from Safety First monsters in order to power the analysis machine. With the materials, they began processing the chips and found surveillance of Francis in Edelstein. Ten Boogies noted that he seemed to be using a side path to enter the mine rather than the main entrance. She asked the knight to investigate the side entrance, though she warned that it would be dangerous. The knight infiltrated the mine and found themselves in Francis's room, where they hid behind a large crystal in order to eavesdrop on Francis and Baroque. Francis was complaining to Baroque that the Cygnus Knights had foiled his plans once again and wondered why they were always seemed out to get him. Baroque pointed out that the Cygnus Knights weren't the only ones who targeted Francis, which he earnestly agreed to. He expressed his annoyance at everyone focusing on him and how a new hero seemed to appear all the time in order to mess up his plans, adding that all he wanted was to be recognized by her. Author's note: this was translated as him in the original Cygnus Knight storyline. It should actually be her, referring to Orchid, but since Korean doesn't really have gendered pronouns, it may have been lost in translation. Baroque reminded him that the master only recognized the worthy and that Francis seemed to have failed her, asking whether that was the reason why he sat cowering in the secret passageway. Francis told him that it wasn't that he was afraid of the master, but rather he hated dealing with Glimmer. As the knight overheard the conversation, they realized that they had never heard of Glimmer before. Baroque told Francis that he didn't care for Glimmer either, and asked that he heard a rumor. Oh, and added that he heard a rumor that Glimmer had angered the master. Francis asked what had happened, to which Baroque explained that Glimmer had fallen behind his timetable once again, thus delaying the resurrection. Though it had been Glimmer's fault, Baroque added that he had been blamed as well, as the master had said that they wouldn't have gotten off track if Baroque had managed to obtain the sealstone of Arev. After hearing their conversation, the knight began wondering about what the sealstone of Arev had to do with the resurrection, as well as whose resurrection it was. As the knight moved closer to here, they accidentally caused a disturbance, alerting Francis and Baroque to their presence. With no choice, the knight stepped out and faced the two Blackwing officers. Though they managed to defeat the pair, the knight realized that both the officers were extremely powerful. The knight asked them who Glimmer was and what the Blackwings were plotting, but Baroque merely laughed and asked if the knight had really thought that he had used the full extent of his powers. Just then, a garrison of Blackwing henchmen appeared and surrounded the knight, with Baroque revealing that he had been going easy on them in order to buy time. As the Blackwings advanced, what they had overheard from the Blackwings, the Resistance was pleased with the information, as it not only confirmed that Glimmer's experiments were related to resurrection, but that there was a schism within the Blackwings as well. However, they were less pleased by how the knight had obtained the information, admonishing them for their reckless behavior, as the Blackwings would retaliate by cracking down on the citizens of Edelstein. Claudine then told the other resistance leaders to return back to base, reminding them that they had a job to do. Before she left, Claudine told the knight that the resistance had only bailed them out in order to even things between them. After a pause, she told them that she had learned that the Blackwings were the ones who had been blocking communications between the Resistance and the Cygnus Knights. However, she added that she had only investigated in order to correct the facts, and that the Resistance had no intention of reconciling with the Cygnus Knights. She then told them to report back to Arev that the Cygnus Knights would never earn their trust. Dejected, the knight returned to Ten Boogies and told her what had happened in the mine. Ten Boogies was amazed by the knight's bravery and believed that they were destined for greatness. She then sent them back to Arev in order to give Neinhart their full report. When the knight told Neinhart of how the resistance had reacted to the Cygnus Knights, he explained that part of a Cygnus Knight's job was to learn how to deal with animosity, adding that from his own personal experience, one got used to it over time. The knight protested that it had been because of the Blackwings tampering with their communications, which Neinhart told them that the day would come when the resistance would come to see the truth about the Cygnus Knights, though he added that the knights would need to learn to accept the resistance's anger until then, especially because it had been the Cygnus Knights' fault for not having foreseen the Blackwing sabotage in advance. He then told them that they should not be afraid of being criticized, as one could not flower if they were afraid of getting soiled. The knight noted how philosophically it sounded, to which Neinhart laughed, that he and Mihail would spend long nights discussing philosophy, while Hawkeye would run away with his hands over his ears. He then asked the knight to deliver the report to the Empress. After the knight told Cygnus about what had happened on Victoria Islands and Hiddlestein, Cygnus noted that they had gone through a lot in such a short amount of time and thanked them for their efforts. The knight dismissed themselves as merely a knight in training, but Cygnus told them that they were doing well. She explained that an empress who had not yet reached adulthood was unable to fully accept the power of Shinsu, which was why both she and the Cygnus Knights had not fully realized their potential. In contrast, she noted that their enemies were getting stronger, with the Blackwings' experiments in particular sounding ominous. She added that their fight against the Blackwings was just the beginning, as they would be facing a greater darkness soon, for which it was imperative that the Cygnus Knights reconcile with the resistance. She then told them to keep growing and asked them to seek out their chief knight. Their chief knight told them that they were impressed by how much they had accomplished, especially given that they were only a knight in training. They then suggested that the knight take the official knighthood exam. Once the knight accepted, the chief knight asked them to go to the second drill hall and defeat a clone of a junior Balrog, which was significantly weaker than the real one. Though challenging, nevertheless, the knight defeated the clone and brought back a proof of knighthood, after which their chief knight promoted them to official knight. The knight then set out to train in Victoria Islands in order to hone their skills. Some time later, Neinhardt contacted them and explained that it was unusual that someone who had been an official knight for so long would still be walking on their own feet. He wrote them a letter of introduction and told them to show it to Kiridu in the hatchery, who would teach them to ride monsters. At of the Mimi race, all of whom were native to the island. He urged them to consider their Mimiana as both a friend and a comrade, rather than just a mode of transportation, explaining that creating such a bond was the very reason why the Cygnus Knights grew their Mimianas themselves. He gave them a Mimiana egg, and told them that it would develop by sharing their experiences with it. Soon after, Mimiana hatched and the knight brought it to Kiridu. He told them that Mimiana's bones were too weak to handle a saddle, and so he told them to seek out Kenta in Aquarium in order to obtain his special supplements. After paying a hefty fee, the knight brought the supplements to Kiridu, who fed them to Mimiana, and taught the knight how to ride it, giving them a saddle as well. Author's note: Kenta is the king of capitalism. I'm convinced that his research is just a front for avoiding paying taxes. The knight then continued training diligently until they were contacted once again by Neinhardt, who noted that they seemed to have made a name for themselves during their travels. He called them back to Arev, where he asked whether they would be willing to try becoming an advanced knight, as they needed Cygnus Knights to quickly advance their talents as the forces of darkness grew. Though not everyone could become an advanced knight, Neinhardt believed that they were already strong enough and asked them to undergo the examination of their chief knight. Their chief knight agreed with Neinhardt and explained that while their official knighthood exam had tested their strength, their advanced knighthood exam would test their conviction. They explained that a knight's conviction shined brightest in the dark and sent them to the third drill hall, where the knight faced their inner darkness in the form of a dark shadow. They then reported back to their chief knight, who was pleased and sent them to meet the Empress. Cygnus was impressed by their growth and unlocked greater power within them before promoting them to advanced knight. Soon after, Neinhardt reached out to them again and noted that they had grown much stronger. He explained that he had an urgent mission that he normally would have only trusted a chief knight to undertake, but as all the chief knights were away on missions, he had decided to entrust it to the knight on their chief knight's recommendation. He asked them to retrieve a book from Wiz the librarian at Helios Tower, emphasizing that the book was highly important. Author's note: this questline was actually the original third job advancement in the old storyline, although it was pretty straightforward and didn't involve the resistance at all. At the library, however, Wiz told them that a group of unidentified people with strange devices and animals had demanded him to give them the book, shortly before the knight had arrived. He explained that the book was ancient and had been written in a strange language. He also explained that the Cygnus Knights had asked to retrieve it upon learning that the Blackwings were trying to take it. The knight chased after the group and caught up with them near Ludibrium Station. They were surprised to find the group was compromised of the resistance leaders. The knight asked them to hand it over, but Claudine refused to give it up, claiming that something that the Blackwings were after would be useful to them. The knights refused to concede, as it was their job to bring the book to Arev. However, Brighton told them that the resistance could not give it up to them. Elix added that it would be unwise for them to attempt to take it back by force. Just then, however, Blackwing henchmen arise to seize the book. The group began to fight the Blackwings off, but Claudine was injured in the struggle. As more enemies closed in, the Knight's chief knight and a legion of Cygnus Knights arrived and reinforced the resistance. Author's note: all the reference videos that I've seen for the Cygnus Knight storyline have been with Dawn Warriors, meaning that Mihail appeared in all of them. However, I am assuming that the chief knight that appears would depend on your class, rather than it being Mihail in every case. As Resistance and the Cygnus Knights began squabbling, Claudine unexpectedly ordered the others to retreat and gave the book to the knight, claiming that it would be safer in Arev than in Edelstein, which was the headquarters of the Blackwings, especially having witnessed the knight's strength firsthand. She added that though the knights still could not be trusted, the resistance would be watching them from afar. The knight returned to Arev and gave the book to Neinhart, who congratulated them on their successful mission. He explained that the book was highly important and should never fall into the hands of the Blackwings or the Black Mage. The knight asked what had been written in the book, as the language was undecipherable. Neinhart explained that even he had no idea what precisely it was, other than the fact that it was a research book written about ancient powers. He told the knight that long ago Maple World had been ruled by the ancient gods, who ruled with their own laws. Though it was unknown who had written the book, nor how or why it had been written, it was clear that it had been written about powers that no longer existed in Maple World, meaning that it had been written countless years ago. Before the book had fallen into obscurity, he told the knight that the book had only been rediscovered recently, when Wiz had found himself being drawn to it in the library. Author's note: my theory is that the book was written by Kristen, who had been researching the ancient gods in Partum, as well as the prophecy of the first explorer during the time of Ellen Forest. Since we have no idea how old he really is, it's entirely possible that he could have been alive during the era of the ancient gods. He explained that the Cygnus Knights had been sent to obtain the book, not because of its contents, but because they didn't want it to fall into the hands of the Black Wings. He also added that the Knights had been facing trouble because of the resistance, and so he resolved to re-establish contact with them with the Knight's help. The knight then spoke with Cygnus and told her that based on their conversation with the resistance, it didn't appear as though reconciliation was possible. However, Cygnus hoped that it would happen in the distant future, and thanked the knight for their efforts.